Actually, they really helped me realize that worrying about a problem that exists is just a lack of faith. But worrying about a problem that doesn't exist or that you have no control over is inexcusable.
Welcome, everybody, to Spirituality. I am really excited to have with us today Captianese. She has her own show that she operates out of Slovenia, and you can find her right here on YouTube. We will link that in the description for you. I am so glad to have you here on the show. Welcome.
Happy to be here.
I was fortunate enough to do a podcast with you and talk to you a little bit, and honestly, your story and your journey sounded so interesting, and I was like wanting to ask you questions instead of you asking me questions. So you had mentioned, I believe, when we were talking that you had kind of stumbled into like your kind of spiritual quest or journey almost by accident.
Yeah, well, I started meditating, and I mean a lot of meditation, because I noticed that my life wasn't really going where I wanted it to go. I was unsuccessful on my own terms, meaning that was the time when my company went bankrupt. I was in debt. I wasn't really benefiting society in any way whatsoever. And so I sat down and I said, okay, I'm in my late 20s. Something's got to give. So I said, okay, well, I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to start talking to whoever's out there.
So when I was down in the dungeon, this is where you usually start becoming spiritual because it's usually like the last hope, right? So that was the same for me. And throughout meditation, I started actually receiving certain messages, if that makes sense. And the messages were actually quite similar to what Christianity preaches, because I somehow stumbled into, let me find out more about God. And there were certain things like become like a child, be still and know that I'm God. And I was thinking, that's something that I came to during my meditation. I'm alone a lot. I'm really introverted. So when you're in solitude for a very long time, you either become enlightened or insane, right? So for me, it was really spiritual. That's how I stumbled across it. And it also helped me get rid of my addiction, meditation, actually.
Oh, that's amazing. Do you practice a brand of spirituality, or is it like really a self-guided journey?
Okay, so it depends. When I was microdosing psychedelics, which we might get to, it was a lot easier because every morning, what I needed to hear that morning was presented to me by default. I think that psychedelics kind of enhance your intuition. It's psychedelics are basically intuition on steroids, right? So every morning they would give me something to really incorporate into my life. So one morning I would be on a guided meditation of self-love. Then the next morning I would just sit and um, pray to God, for a lack of a better expression, right? But otherwise, now that I'm not microdosing anymore, it really depends. What I think I need, I'm going to incorporate. So if I have a lot of problems in my everyday life, the death awareness meditation does wonders. Because the thing about the death awareness meditation is you cannot focus on the fact that you're going to die someday and then think about your problems at the same time. It's impossible. Whereas with other types of meditation, you can kind of get anxious, your thoughts can come into mind. So it's kind of like a mental diarrhea type of situation. With death awareness, you cannot do that. I mean, you just cannot. So if you have a lot of problems, that's what I would recommend. But other than that, I did self hypnosis for, I mean, a couple of times. Otherwise, it's either a guided meditation or I just focus on my breathing and then that's it. And actually, here I have a question for you, if
Yeah.
I may. Sometimes during my meditation, I become really sleepy. I don't really fall asleep, but if you fall asleep during meditation, is that bad? Did you ruin the session? Do you have any insight on that?
No, not at all. In fact, meditation is kind of the practice of taking the conscious mind, the conscious ego personality, the waking personality, closer and closer to a subconscious state, which is what sleep is. So it's not ruining meditation at
Mm,
all. It's really you've brought your, when you're falling asleep, if you bring your waking consciousness closer and closer to that subconscious state, it's a good indication of being able to begin to have a flexible waking ego. It says that I'm flexible enough to be conscious and yet this close to subconsciousness. When you start to blend the two, it's like we were talking about with lucid dreaming. It's where you really start to get closer and closer to being okay with experiencing your subconscious more directly. So no, there's nothing ruined there.
I see. Awesome. Well, thanks for that. Well, that's good
Yes.
news. There you go.
Yeah, no, for sure. Um, how did you, do you mind me asking, like, how did you get into microdosing as a part of your spiritual practices? What did that look like for you?
Okay, so well, the microdosing is something I heard on the Andrew Huberman podcast, I think, and I thought, why not try it? I did full doses before. The last time I did full dosing, I thought it was going to be a very pleasant springtime, relaxed walk in the woods. But turns out that as I was walking into the woods, it's as if something took my hand and brought me home and said, "Sit down here. You need some therapy." And I just automatically, I sat down. I lay down actually, and I saw how it's gonna look like when I die. And from that moment on, I wasn't really afraid of death anymore. So well, because I saw myself as a 2-year old, 2 to 3 year old, right? She came to me, and so that was weird. And then afterwards, I said, okay, I need to do some more research on microdosing and psychedelics in general. The beauty about microdosing is that you don't have a set, you take, what is that? I don't know. Well, I mean, it depends on the person, but you take a couple of milligrams and then, well, and then you let the wonders come, right? So it's very convenient. That's why I started microdosing. Yeah.
Mhm. Do you mind if I ask, like, what were you microdosing specifically?
There was a company that actually wanted to sponsor my podcast, and they sent me a set. It was lion's mane, which is not which doesn't contain psilocybin, mixed with something that does contain psilocybin. I think it was Amazon mushrooms or something like that. So it was like a mix. Yeah, so that's what I was microdosing on every day for about a month.
Do you find that, like, after you spent some time doing the microdosing, like, did you find that were your meditations and stuff after you stopped microdosing, were you still feeling like you gained a lot
Mhm.
of experience and a lot from that to where it helped you moving forward with your meditation?
Absolutely. What microdosing does is it gives you a couple of IQ points. It's literally when you look at something from one angle, if you change the perspective, it's as if you actually gained IQ points because now with the other perspective, you're able to solve whatever problem you had. So that's what microdosing gave me. Even if you feel a certain feeling when you're on your microdosing, even if you take that away, the knowledge stays. It has been incorporated. You know what to do. You have that knowledge now. You cannot take it back. So that's what they did for me. It actually they really helped me realize that I'm really not in control of a lot of things and that worrying about things, I mean, worrying about a problem that exists is just a lack of faith. But worrying about a problem that doesn't exist or that you have no control over is inexcusable. So I really learned to just let it go. And man, I feel like it was a big burden lift off of me after microdosing. Um, yeah, just it really helped me focus on what I need to focus and and let like 70% of things go. So it was a really life-changing experience, this thing.
Do you think that the microdosing experience, do you think it opens up more of the subconscious to be experienceable by the waking personality? Like, did it feel to you like it was maybe relieving some of the anxiety or inhibitions that would have been there normally on the part of the waking personality in order to experience that reality in a different way, in a calmer state?
Yes, yeah, and that's a very good question. Yes, yes, and that's very helpful with the addiction.
Yeah,
It's when you try these psychedelics in general, it's almost as if this Pandora box opens of whatever you need to fix and all the things that you don't necessarily want to look at. And people who are addicted to something, they're grappled with the addiction and say, I don't want to open that Pandora box. Well, what makes you think you're outside of it? This is the opening to what life is. You don't want to experience what? Life? So yeah, it tells you what you need to do, what you really need to do, and it's ugly, and you probably don't really want to do it. But it's kind of like cleaning your fridge, you have a bunch of rotten food in the fridge, and then first you have to take all the shit out, and it doesn't really look pretty. And in some time the fridge is gonna be empty, but at least it's not rotten. And then you start putting the right things
yeah,
back. The actual like the final picture is why you did it in the first place. So it's not also with these ayahuasca sessions, this is not fun. This is not party time. If you do it for like therapeutic reasons, right, and to grow spiritually. um but man, looking back, it was one of the best decisions in my life was the microdosing session.
I've been curious about it for quite some time because obviously these kinds of practices were
Hmm.
used by people back in the day, ancient people, and especially First Nations people for spiritual purposes, using natural substances in that way. And there's been a lot of research and study in the US right now about using microdosing MDMA to help people who are going trauma
Mm.
victims. People who've been through, like soldiers, police officers, people who've been through serious trauma, assault victims, things like that, because it helps reduce the fear and the inhibitions so people can look at the trauma without fear and face it. And it kind of made me curious because I think a lot of what holds people back from really being able to connect with the subconscious, which we feel like is unknown and unstable to us, it's a mystery, is the fear of finding out what's there. It feels destabilizing to the waking consciousness. So I think microdosing is super
Yeah.
interesting, is valuable to hear experiences from people like you who've been through it.
Yeah, also, with as they say, the one experience with these microdosing or ayahuasca or whatever is like 12 years or more of traditional psychotherapy. When you go to a therapist, all you can do is you can talk. Like you cannot get into the depths of your psyche with the therapist by talking to him. It's impossible. I mean, the depths that psychedelics take you to, a therapist can never. So I think that these psychedelic assisted therapies are actually like a really good idea, and I hope they become legal in some of the places.
Yeah, they've been doing a lot of research here with the, at least I'm not sure about the like psychedelics, but they've been doing the research here with MDMA, which is street name is ecstasy for people who don't know, with
Mhm.
microdosing that to get past the fear and inhibitions, things like shame, things that hold us back from really facing what's inside, facing trauma and bringing it up and dealing with it. So I think it's a super interesting topic.
And it also gives you it gives you a look into how you're actually talking to yourself. It's Psychedelics give you a mirror in which you not only see your true self, but also what you've been telling yourself. What you tell yourself on a daily basis. And for a lot of people, that's straight up bullying. It's hate speech every day, all the time, and they don't even realize it. So when you take psychedelics, you start looking at the thoughts that pop into your head and what you've been telling yourself all the time, your negative self-talk, which is the most important talk you're ever going to have, and you realized, wow, that was self-bullying number, like I was the biggest bully I've ever met in my life. And that's also something that they show you. And then they show you how to get out of it. So for me, it was as if they told me that I need to treat myself as a parent would discipline a child. So if I do something bad, it's like, okay, you shouldn't have done that, but I still love you, right? Instead of like the traditional teenage bullying, you shouldn't have done that, you're a piece of shit, you're never going to amount to anything. And for a lot of people, that's their subconscious talk to themselves. So the psychedelics really show you that, and you're able to realize how you're actually treating yourself, right?
Yeah, and I feel like that's a super important point. I've been contemplating lately like what unconditional love really is and why is it so hard for us? Like why is self the hardest person to apply unconditional love to? And I think you're onto something in that it's
Hmm.
we're who's closest to us than we are. We abuse ourselves the most. So it would make sense that it's the most
Yeah.
difficult for us to love ourselves unconditionally if all we've been doing to ourselves is being horrible. So that's a really interesting thing to contemplate and look at.
And you also have to establish trust with yourself. So what that means, if you try to keep your word when you're talking to other people. If I said I'm going to do something, I want to do it because I want them to recognize that that I respect them. But a lot of times we tell ourselves, okay, tomorrow I'm going to go to the gym, tomorrow I'm going to work out, tomorrow I'm going to meditate, tomorrow I'm going to treat myself. But then we don't do it. So you don't even keep a word to yourself,
Speaking of going to the
So
gym, do you want to?
you really.
Sorry, I was going to say
Yeah,
since
yeah.
you
I mean, just
brought it up. I was going
yeah,
to say, speaking of going to the gym, do you want to tell everybody how you got a black eye really fast?
yeah. Nobody threw a bottle at me. I'm a boxer, so it happens every now and then. I'm probably gonna have to be like that on my next few episodes, so that's gonna be
No,
fun.
that's fine. It's obviously you're doing something that you like to do and training your body, so it's a badge of honor.
Yeah, yeah. You can look at it that way. Well, yeah. So you have to what you wanna give to others, you also have to give to yourself. I mean, it's so simple, but we don't do it. I mean, we don't even sleep enough, for God's sake. We don't even nurture ourselves, you know? So those are the things that really come forward with psychedelics. I think some people coming home from their ayahuasca retreat stop eating certain foods, and not only that, they eliminate certain people from their lives. I mean, this is kind of intuition or God's work, whatever, the God is going to remove certain people from your life because he heard conversations you didn't hear. And when ayahuasca also pumps up your intuition to the point where you just stop communicating to certain people, or maybe you start setting boundaries with certain people. And obviously they don't like that because you never had any boundaries. So I mean, your life could change drastically. This is serious. This is not some recreational woo-woo party, like some people use it for.
Do you find that when you went through this, because this is interesting. I mean, I think everybody who goes through this kind of journey, like you said, like people just fall out of your life, things change so drastically. Did you find that you had to actually put your foot down with people and cut them out of your life, or that it happened almost naturally, like you just stopped calling that person and they stopped calling you, it just poof, gone?
Well, that's interesting because I never really had a social circle in the first place. I'm very, very to myself, like if there was ever a loner, it would be me. So I didn't do that, but it did automatically cut certain things from my life. So I was a real estate agent. All of a sudden, not only was I not interested in it, I was kind of forcing this career, for lack of a better expression, because of status or money. And it just started cutting it off. So one client would cancel me, then the other client would, then my mentor would say she's not doing a good job. Maybe I wasn't, but everything just happened afterwards. And I had to let it go, you know. When God speaks to you, when he says yes, sometimes it's not loud enough, sometimes you don't hear it, sometimes you overlook it, sometimes you don't think it's his voice, but God's no's are usually pretty loud. So that's what happens. So I'm not questioning that, you know. When I lose interest in something, even like no matter how long I've been doing it, okay, if God says so, I better get the fuck out of here. And this is where I started really focusing on my podcast, and I think it's the right thing to do. You know, this is something that I love. You know, they say find what you love and let it kill you. If that doesn't work out, I don't have a plan B, and that's fine because this is something that I love doing, and it, whatever happens, man, it was worth it. So I'm all in, and so that was the biggest change from my psychedelic experience. Yeah.
I think
Mhm.
that's really awesome.
And also, and also telling the truth. No, I thinking back, I used to lie a lot, and it wasn't big lies; it was small lies. I don't have time. No, that's okay. You look great. Yeah, I did that already. You know, like the small lies that we like to tell, but each time you tell a lie, I feel like your conscience literally drops a little bit. You know, the lies are the language of a devil, and I think that if you follow God's path, you need to tell the truth. Like this is the path, right? So I really started paying attention to when I'm lying and when I'm telling the truth. And at the beginning, it was hard because I had to consciously remind myself when I wanted to say something that wasn't true, like, ah, that's not true. I'm not going to say it. And then after a while, I started, you know, just automatically eliminate lies out of my life. And I don't remember the last time I lied, honestly. Um, every now and then I do, but I really started to eliminate them like as much as possible because I used to lie on a daily basis. And you know, children don't lie. So that's kind of like in the Bible it says become like a child. So that's also one of the things that I realized, you know. So yeah, I totally forgot what your question was,
That's
but
okay.
yeah.
I was just thinking that I think that's a super powerful statement too, because it's like the more that we become used to telling those lies in our daily lives and letting that be okay, I think the easier it is to hide from ourselves the lies we tell ourselves. We begin to tell ourselves lies that because
Mm,
it feels more comfortable, we rationalize things to ourselves. We start to tell ourselves bigger and bigger fibs about our past or the reasons why things didn't work out. So it's like when we engage in that behavior, it's like we're trying to be soothing, like you tell somebody, "Oh no, you look fine," or everything,
mhm.
you tell it's an attempt to be soothing, but ultimately I think it's a reflection of the way that we try to be self-soothing and telling ourselves lies so that we can bury things we don't have to look at. I think that's sort of how so many subconscious things get buried so deep under all of the lies that we tell ourselves over a period of time.
I don't think people realize how detrimental even these little white lies are over a period of time. That's why narcissism isn't treatable. Well, it doesn't seem to be treatable because it's when the person has been entangled in lies for such a long period of time that getting out of it is impossible. I mean, not in this lifetime. So, and every treatment, even treating addictions or treating personality disorders, needs truth to be incorporated. You cannot cure it without the presence of like radical truth. So if you don't have the truth, you have nothing because I mean, you try to distort reality and expect to go on the same way. That doesn't make sense, you know. So it's definitely good to have truth on your side. So that's something that I also learned from psychedelics. That was a big lesson,
It's
and
interesting.
it's very freeing. You know, it's extremely freeing when you let it go and you tell the truth, and you're like, gosh, I don't have to lie anymore. That's, you know, it's a liberation like no other.
It makes me wonder whether or not microdosing might be the treatment for narcissism. You
Hmm.
know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
Like
a.
if you're microdosing, you can get
Mm.
to the truth, get beneath all of those lies and the lies you tell yourselves. I think narcissism a lot of the times is you've built yourself up, you've told yourself so many lies that you have to make your reality and other people believe your lies about yourself. So
Hmm. Yeah, it's a post-traumatic stress disorder where the coping mechanism is the false self,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's also a religion where the worshiper and the god is the same person. That's a good notion. Or because even, us who don't have personality disorder that we would know of, receiving so much truth about yourself sometimes can be almost too much. For a narcissist, maybe it would be too much. I don't know. Maybe they would go insane. That's definitely a good
I
thought.
think
I,
it
I,
would
I
be.
would I would love to see a research on that, honestly.
Right? It sounds like we need
Wow.
some funding for some research.
Huh. Yeah.
I think
Wow. Well, I mean, if narcissism is a private religion, if the false self is a private god, then what psychedelics would have to do is they would have to remove the religion and replace it with another religion. Wow.
it
Okay.
would getting underneath that very fragile, because you could almost say that a narcissist has the most rigid waking ego personality, the most fragile, the most invalid,
Yeah.
right? That's why it's a fright mechanism. It feels unstable and invalid, the waking human, so it builds up these lies around itself. But to get away from those lies and get into the subconscious to find out what's actually driving it, microdosing might actually be a tool to help rehabilitate people who have buried their ego, buried their own instability or their own sense of invalue underlies for so long, to help get it out of there. I think it's interesting.
Wow. Yeah. Well, with the narcissist, if you remove the false self, there's nothing. There's a big void there because as a child, the narcissist invented that false self to shield him from inadequacies and all the traumas that were coming his way, all the emotional distortion. That's why people with borderline personality disorder are failed narcissists because they experienced the same thing, but they failed to create the shield. So they were just left, emotionally distorted all the time. But if you remove everything and you're left with what's left with the narcissism, there's not much left. So he would have a lot of things to reinvent, to recover. At least with us, if you remove all the shit that we don't really need, if you burn the wood off of the trees that aren't healthy anymore, at least there's one tree, like we have something to hold on to. Like, okay, I did all that shit, but I'm kind of a good daughter, or I'm still a good person. With the narcissist, he's not. He doesn't know what he is even. So I really don't know how that would look like. I would love for
Yeah.
that to happen,
I'm
man.
not, I
They
mean,
need to start doing that.
obviously I'm not a clinical psychologist or anything. So I don't know what the dangers in attempting that would be. But I have to believe, just as a person and as a practitioner, that for every person that comes into this world, underneath everything else, no matter what it is, there is that point, that divergent point. There is the inner child. There is the self that you were before all of
Hmm.
this happened. There's the soul that you were that came into this world. So there's somewhere in there, there's a basis and an untarnished self, or a genuine self, that's underneath everything else. And I mean, you may be right, it may be far more difficult to get to that, back to that self, for some people than other people. But I think it's interesting and would be worth a try, um, under clinical conditions. Obviously, like I wouldn't attempt trying to do it on your own. You would probably want some trained clinical conditions to do that. But I think there's a lot of
Yeah.
potential in microdosing for helping with some of these types of things.
I never thought of that before.
Yeah, I mean,
I would love to see that. I want I want this research done as soon as
well, I
possible.
mean, I just find
You know?
I find it really too bad. Like, I don't know how it is where you are, but where we are here, I mean, we have many pharmaceutical companies that make all kinds of synthetic drugs out of things for people for all kinds of conditions, but they treat natural substances that have been used for spiritual practices and for these traditions for a long, long time as like Schedule 3 illegal substances. And I feel like it's too bad to not look into the potential medicinal purposes of those kinds of substances and what they could help heal and help bring to light for people, especially now that we're learning so much more about the human psyche and human psychological conditions. I think we have a lot to learn still.
Yeah, with pharmaceutical companies, I don't think we're playing the same game here. The reason why they don't want to incorporate these type of natural remedies is because they help. I think a lot of times this medical system doesn't want to treat you and doesn't want to kill you. It wants to keep you
It
sick
wants you to be
so that
addicted.
they can keep on prescribing things. Yeah, so maybe we're not even speaking of the same language, maybe we don't have the same goals. Kind of like when you want to show someone how to fix the problem only to realize that what they actually wanted was to just talk about the problem.
Mhm.
So maybe, I don't know. I'm just skeptical about the whole purpose of the pharmaceutical companies. Um, yeah, I mean, if I think just as an entrepreneur, the worst thing you want to do is create a product that's going to eliminate your product. So I don't know, but I do hope it comes more available. Yeah, I do hope for that.
Yeah, I think so too.
Man, we need to advance in this field. I think it's one of the fields where we are the most disadvanced. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I totally agree. Yeah.
Well, it's been really, really interesting talking to you. I'm so glad that you decided to jump on here and come talk to me. It's a fascinating discussion. You guys can check out Captianese at her channel. She has a bunch of straight talk, really awesome podcasts that she does. I will link that in the description. Please go check her out and support the channel. Thank you so much for being here. I really
Awesome.
appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. That was pretty awesome. You have a good insight, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
You think about things that I wouldn't have thought of. So I have some research to do. Actually, I maybe I'll get someone on my podcast who maybe has tried to do something like that with people with personality disorder, also psychopathy. I would love to see that. So yeah.
Well, let me know what you find out. Check back with me because I'd love to know more about it. I think it's a super interesting topic.